Just a few days shy of his 59th birthday, Lewis C. Taylor was released from prison after serving a 42-year sentence for a crime many believe he was falsely accused of. On a sunny April day back in 2013, Taylor was greeted in the parking lot of the Arizona State Prison Complex in Tucson by his team of defense attorneys from the organization known as the Arizona Justice Project, which helps inmates overturn wrongful convictions. During his first few hours of freedom, Taylor was treated to lunch at a local fast food restaurant and was given the opportunity to take a scenic hike through Sabino Canyon. Although relieved he was no longer incarcerated, his mind was still burdened with the condition of his release. Pima County Attorney Barbara Lawal stated to the press shortly after Taylor's release hearing, quote, "This is not an exoneration." Lawal, along with other members of the county attorney's office, continued to believe Taylor was guilty of starting the fire at the Pioneer Hotel that resulted in the deaths of 29 people. However, it would have been nearly impossible for county prosecutors to prove that had a judge granted Taylor a new trial. With modern-day advancements in fire investigation, the cause of the fire was deemed undetermined by a team of forensic fire science experts working for the defense and an investigator working for the Tucson Fire Department. Furthermore, due to the time that had passed, over 40 years, many of the eyewitnesses were now deceased, and a lot of the evidence was either destroyed or had gone missing. Rather than going ahead with a new trial, Lewis C. Taylor was offered a plea deal, which he accepted. Taylor pleaded no contest to 28 counts of murder. The 29th victim died later due to injuries sustained in the fire, but was not included in the original indictment. In return, he would be released for time served. The Arizona Justice Project's defense team felt the condition of the plea deal was yet another injustice handed down to Taylor, who had spent the majority of his adult life in prison, convicted of a crime that might not have even occurred. They were prepared to clear Taylor's name once and for all by citing sloppy investigation tactics, withheld evidence, and racial discrimination. But Taylor refused to spend one more day in prison for a crime he insisted he was innocent of, even if it meant pleading no contest to all of the charges. Taylor was visibly emotional and held back tears during a press conference the day after his release. He was a free man, but in the eyes of the law, he was still guilty of committing one of the most heinous crimes the city of Tucson had ever seen. More on the case of Lewis C. Taylor and the history of the Pioneer coming up next in part 1 of this 2-part series. Welcome to episode 7 of El Presidio Project.
Uncovering the creepy side of the old Pueblo. This is El Presidio Project. Strange Tales of Tucson.
Hello everybody, Dini here with the second true crime episode of this podcast. This one is special for many reasons, but in regards to the subjects El Presidio Project focuses on, the Pioneer Hotel has all three. True crime, some urban legends attached to it, and of course many ghost stories. The urban legend and paranormal stuff will be the subject of part 2. This part, of course, will be all about the history of the Pioneer Hotel, but more importantly, the case of Lewis C. Taylor. Some 47 years have passed since the tragic fire at the Pioneer, and yet it continues to be one of the most controversial and talked about incidents in the city's history. Trying to fit everything into a 20-minute podcast would have been a challenge, so rather than rush through everything in one shot, I decided to present this topic in 2 parts, because there's so much to tell and I really felt it needed to be broken down in this way. So having said that, I now present to you episode 7, Fire at the Pioneer, Part 1, The Accused. For over 40 years, the Pioneer Hotel was the pride and joy of downtown Tucson. It stood 11 stories high, making it the tallest building in the city at the time of its highly publicized grand opening on December 12, 1929. The Arizona Daily Star called it a crowning achievement in civic and commercial growth. The majestic pioneer, with its Spanish Revival architecture, luxurious interior which included the largest ballroom in the country, and its famous roof garden and sun deck, ushered the old pueblo into the modern age with the promise of a future filled with progress. The people of Tucson, facing the uncertainty of the Great Depression, needed a beacon of hope, and the Pioneer was it. Construction of the hotel was financed by one of Tucson's wealthiest families, the Steinfelds. Albert Steinfeld arrived in Tucson in the 1870s at the age of 17. Legend has it, when he first laid eyes on the desert surroundings that would become his home, he cried himself to sleep. "The conditions in Tucson were a great deal worse than I expected," he once said. But he persevered and eventually became a successful businessman. So successful, in fact, it's been said that he became a millionaire by the age of 28. On March 15, 1906, Steinfeld invited the public to attend the grand opening of his department store, Albert Steinfeld and Company. Some 5,000 people, nearly half of the adult population at the time, showed up to browse and shop that day. Steinfeld's department store would become a downtown Tucson staple for years to come. By 1929, Albert Steinfeld was in his mid-70s. Although he owned the Pioneer Hotel, which conveniently stood nearby his famous department store, he left the majority of the operation in the hands of his son Harold. Harold Steinfeld successfully managed the hotel for years and eventually took up permanent residence there. The Pioneer Hotel was a very popular destination for locals, but it also drew in visitors from all over the country. Notable guests included Eleanor Roosevelt, President Lyndon B. Johnson, actor Will Rogers, and the Major League Baseball team, the Cleveland Indians, who temporarily resided there during spring training season. As time passed, many downtown businesses came and went, but the Pioneer remained. It was good to Tucson, and Tucson was good to it. But sadly, that would all come to an end on a cold December night in 1970. It was 5 days before Christmas. The streets of downtown Tucson were crowded with shoppers purchasing presents for friends and family. Christmas lights and other festive decorations adorned department store windows as far as the eye could see. Over at the Pioneer Hotel, a holiday party was in full swing. An estimated 350 employees of Hughes Aircraft Company were gathered in the ballroom, spreading Christmas cheer and enjoying the music of Luis Leon and his band. Shortly after midnight, emergency dispatchers began receiving calls.
Tucson Fire Department.
Oh, this is Pioneer International Hotel?
Yeah.
There's a fire on the third floor. Can we get some response, please?
Fire on the third floor?
That's what we're having people calling down. There's smoke all upstairs.
Okay, we'll get somebody right there.
Thank you, sir.
Hold on.
When firefighters arrived at the scene, they quickly discovered it was worse than they imagined. Black smoke poured out of the upper floor windows. In desperation and panic, trapped guests began making makeshift ropes out of blankets and bedsheets and attempted to climb down to safety. Mattresses were tossed out of windows, and people began to jump, hoping the bedding would break their fall. This, of course, resulted in a bloody and gruesome mess, witnessed by dozens of terrified onlookers. When the Pioneer Hotel opened in 1929, it was advertised as being fireproof, a description that would later haunt everyone who remembers the night of December 20th, 1970. The Pioneer's interior was covered with Christmas decorations, which ignited quickly. This, along with the highly flammable carpeting and wallpaper, accelerated the fire. The open stairwells, the unfortunate lack of an indoor sprinkler system, and the padlock-shut emergency exits went on to create a death trap. Further complicating the matter, the aerial ladders the Tucson Fire Department was equipped with were incapable of reaching the top floors. At one point, the fire hoses malfunctioned, and during a rescue attempt, a ladder collapsed, injuring 3 firefighters. Despite all of these obstacles, the Tucson Fire Department, with the assistance of local police and concerned citizens, were able to evacuate the majority of the guests and permanent residents of the hotel. Regrettably, 28 people were unable to be saved. Carbon monoxide poisoning took the lives of most of the victims, including Harold Steinfeld and his wife Margaret, who were found in their penthouse residence on the 11th floor. The other victims died due to falls or burns. Among the dead were a mother and her 5 children. Although the structure remained intact, the landmark Pioneer Hotel was never the same again. Tucson's beacon of hope had become a painful reminder of an incredible loss. But what caused the fire? Local police quickly turned their attention to a young man named Lewis C. Taylor. Various witnesses, including a police officer, placed a then 16-year-old Taylor at the scene numerous times on the night of the fire. Hotel security had turned the young man away twice earlier that evening, but at some point Taylor managed to enter the building. About an hour or so before the fire began, a man attending the Hughes aircraft party in the ballroom saw Taylor hanging around and asked him if he knew where the cigarette machine was. Taylor said he did. After a brief conversation, the man offered Taylor a cigarette, which he accepted. "Do you need a match?" he asked. Taylor politely declined and showed the man a book of matches he was holding in his hand. This seemingly ordinary encounter would later be used to place Taylor at the scene of the crime in possession of something that could have very easily started a fire. 2 hotel employees would later testify they saw Taylor standing near the stairwell of the 3rd floor after the fire had started. Taylor reportedly began yelling, "There's a fire, get an extinguisher." Soon after, Taylor accompanied the 2 hotel employees to the 3rd floor to assist stranded guests on the upper floors. He helped in the rescue of a young girl who had fallen and personally lended a hand in carrying her out of the hotel in a makeshift stretcher. Police officer Klaus Bergman also testified that he had seen Taylor near the mezzanine checking out the Christmas party. In desperate need of help, Bergman grabbed Taylor by the arm and asked him to help with alerting guests that there was a fire in the building. Taylor did, and even half-carried an elderly woman down the stairs to safety. Lewis Taylor was lauded as a hero that night by firemen, police, guests, and hotel employees. A photograph of the young man standing at the entrance of the hotel holding the door open for rescue workers was even published in a local newspaper. But within a matter of hours, Taylor went from being a hero to the prime suspect in an event that would later be referred to as the worst day in Tucson history. The following day, a different photograph of Lewis C. Taylor was plastered on the front page of a local newspaper with the heading, "Boy at Hotel Fire Held." Taylor was described as a 4-time parolee from the State Industrial School for Boys at Fort Grant. The article also informed the general public that the director of the Pima County Juvenile Court had given notice to the press that documents alleging arson and felony murder were in preparation. In the days that followed, the press quoted various sources characterizing Taylor as a sullen and incorrigible youth, a grade school dropout guilty of strong-arm robbery at 13, antisocial, and a one-time resident of the federally funded La Reforma public housing project. Lewis Taylor was a young black youth with a troubled past. With emotions running high, negative press, and Taylor's inability to produce a consistent reason as to why he was at the Pioneer that night, many people believed, and continue to believe, it was shamefully all too easy to pin the blame on the local teenager from Tucson's South Side. It's been reported on the night of the fire, Taylor was interrogated by the police for 7 consecutive hours with no attorney present or a parent to assist him. It's also been reported that his interrogation was never recorded, nor did anyone present take notes. For these reasons, Taylor's defense attorney filed a motion that would have prevented his client's statements to the police from ever reaching the courtroom. The motion was denied. This was crushing to the defense because Taylor's official story changed numerous times. At first he said he was at the Pioneer that night visiting a friend. He later admitted that wasn't true. Taylor then stated he was really there to crash the Christmas party to see if he could score some free drinks. The defense argued even if Taylor's story had changed in regards as to why he was at the Pioneer that night, that didn't make him an arsonist, and certainly not a murderer. But of course, the prosecution didn't see it that way. The 16-year-old lied because he was guilty. They also noted when Taylor was arrested, he was found with 5 books of matches in his pocket and mentioned Taylor himself admitted to starting small fires around town, but never inside a building where people could get hurt. The prosecution, however, failed to mention suspicious fires had broken out at the Pioneer a few months before. The description of the suspect did not match Louis C. Taylor. The serial arsonist questioned by the police was a young white male named Donald Anthony. The day after the Pioneer Hotel fire, Donald Anthony left the state. With local investigators unable to come up with a reason for the fire, eventually law officials called in a fire investigator working for the California State Division of Forestry. Cy Holmes began his investigation 10 days after the Pioneer fire. Holmes was unable to locate an object or a specific heat source that could have started the fire, but testified it was more than likely man-made, due to finding evidence that pointed to 2 areas 60 feet apart that could have been the points of origin. When asked if the fire could have been accidental, Holmes stated it was possible, but didn't believe that to be the case. The prosecution didn't have undeniable proof that Taylor was guilty of the crimes he was accused of. Still, Taylor was ordered to stand trial as an adult on March 5, 1971. Due to all the publicity the Pioneer Hotel fire case received in Tucson, the trial was moved to Phoenix. A little over a year later, an all-white jury found Louis C. Taylor guilty of 28 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison on March 21, 1972. Taylor was 17 years old. The Arizona Justice Project became interested in the Taylor case after an expose aired on 60 Minutes. It took over a decade of sorting through court records, witness testimony, and evidence for them to piece together a case that could have potentially set Louis Taylor free. One of the most significant and damaging moments in the investigation came in a sworn court deposition of Cy Holmes, the fire investigator, some 30 years after his original testimony. Taylor's defense team were shocked by his reasons as to why he concluded the arsonist in the Pioneer Hotel fire case was a young black male. Holmes stated outright the following: "Fire was a tool. It was a tool for them. In other words, you're comfortable with it. And if they get mad at somebody, the first thing they do is use something they're comfortable with. Fire was one of them." This embarrassing and clearly racist statement immediately destroyed his credibility, which the defense would most definitely bring up if a judge granted Taylor a new trial. But as stated in the beginning of this episode, Taylor was not granted a new trial. He was released instead with the original conviction still intact. The Tucson community kept in touch with Taylor in the months that followed. News reports of his life on the outside showed him working at a movie theater and helping out in a local shop. I really wish I could say this episode ends with Louis C. Taylor happily living out his life in Tucson. But I can't. In July of 2017, Taylor, now 63, was arrested once again. Officers from the downtown district in Tucson booked him into the Pima County Jail on charges of armed robbery. He is currently awaiting trial. I'll be back in a few weeks with part 2 of this series on the Pioneer Hotel. Talk to you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.